Today we will test the input lag of Spider-Man 2 in its various graphics modes. There are 6 distinct modes to go through, and I tested the latency in different spots around the city. It was important to test different spots because 2 of these graphics modes have an unlocked frame rate and are meant to be used with a VRR screen at 120Hz. I did not test the VRR modes labeled smooth because these don't really do anything. So the modes tested here are the ones that actually give a tangible performance and input latency difference. These modes are Fidelity Mode at 60 Hz, Fidelity Mode at 120 Hz, Performance Mode at 60 Hz, Performance Mode at 120 Hz, and the 2 VRR modes, Fidelity Mode and Performance Mode at 120 Hz with the option VRR Uncapped enabled. For the 2 VRR modes, I specifically looked for a spot like this. Away from traffic. And then moved the camera all the way up, which means only Spidey and the skybox need to be rendered. In this scene, I was able to push the uncapped performance mode all the way to 116 frames per second. Due to low frame rate compensation, it is hard to tell which frame rate the fidelity mode reaches here. Low frame rate compensation either displays each frame 2 times or 3 times, which your TV will then display as its frame rate number. My TV shows 114 and 120 here, which means the game should run at 57 to 60 frames per second. Basically, just divide the refresh number by 2. Some of the other spots tested push the GPU and CPU way more. One of the scenes stares directly into a ray-traced window, for example, and yet another overlooks Times Square. This should give us results for all the extremes and the median GPU and CPU load, both of which will influence the input latency at least to a certain degree. Let's go into the tests. I'll see you again after we are through them all. Here are the results of all tests. All the tests done here were done with a Samsung S95B OLED TV. This TV has around 9.9 milliseconds of lag at 60 Hz. And around 5.4 milliseconds of lag at 120 Hz. Also please expect an error of up to 4.116 milliseconds, as timing perfectly on the button press is not easy. I always try to time it from when the light shining through the transparent X button is either 100% gone or very close to completely gone. The numbers you see in orange show the latency as I saw it on my TV. The numbers in white are roughly how much latency the game itself has. As you can see in the VRR modes, the numbers with TV lag removed aren't 100% defined. That is because since the refresh rate of the TV will go up and down with the unlocked frame rate of the game, it's not possible to get the TV lag 100% correct. For the Fidelity VRR mode it should be close to what you see here, so 127.912 milliseconds. This mode doesn't vary as much in terms of refresh rate due to the fact that the low frame rate compensation of the game will keep the TV's refresh rate relatively close to 120 Hz. But it's still not 100% accurate, of course. Due to the way more variable refresh in the performance VRR mode, I am giving you here the worst and best possible average. The first number is with 9.9 milliseconds removed and the second one is with 5.4 milliseconds removed. The true latency is somewhere in the middle here. The performance VRR mode will in general have the most variable input lag because it also has the most variable frame rate. We are seeing frame rates from 60 frames per second all the way up to 116 frames per second here. In reality, the average should be more around 70 frames per second and 90 frames per second when you're not looking directly into traffic and while playing missions that take place in smaller enclosed areas. 116 frames per second or anything close to that is the very rare exception. But as you saw in the test, that ridiculously high frame rate does also result in the lowest latency number by far, with 83.320 milliseconds. That is around 17 milliseconds less latency than the best result in the locked 60 frames per second test when playing at 120 Hz output. What is however curious, and you might have already noticed this, is the fact that the unlocked Fidelity mode seems to have noticeably higher latency than the locked 40 frames per second mode. My theory here is that the GPU is pushed all the way to its limit, while the average frame rate is barely higher than 40 frames per second. When your GPU is completely pushed to its limit, your input latency will increase. On PC you might have seen or heard about NVIDIA Reflex. NVIDIA Reflex reduces input lag, and one way it does it is by limiting the GPU load, which in return limits your frame rate below what your GPU could run the game at. The reduced GPU load will noticeably reduce the lag of the game. So yeah, since no such a feature is present here, I think the GPU is being pushed extremely hard in this unlocked Fidelity mode, and without a big performance increase, resulting in the higher lag. The 40 frames per second lock in this case limits the GPU load, so similarly to NVIDIA Reflex on PC, this option seems to reduce latency by doing the same thing Reflex does. But hey,
that's just a theory, a game theory!
I am however as a whole very disappointed with these results. The only mode with an average latency below 100 milliseconds is the performance VRR mode at 120 Hz. And the 30 frames per second Fidelity mode is outright awful and should be avoided at all cost. The 40 frames per second mode and the 60 frames per second mode at 60 Hz are so close, however, that the choice here is really only dependent on how smooth you want your game to look. The 60 frames per second mode does have a slight advantage, but it's so small that you won't notice. Especially if you look at the numbers when my TV lag is added back in. With the TV lag included, they were on average identical on my TV. Because, while the Fidelity 40 frames per second mode has more lag, the reduced TV lag of only 5.4 milliseconds means that it evens it out overall. But if you have the option to use the 40 frames per second mode, that means you have a 120 Hz TV, which also means you have access to the 60 frames per second mode at 120 Hz, or even the unlocked VRR performance mode. So your real choice here is between 118.5, 104.9 and 86.9 to 91.4 milliseconds of lag.